we haven't said anything yet. Anyway, thanks. Hi, folks. I'm Sharon Moshavi, and this is, you've already met.
Name's Justin Arenstein, Code for Africa.
And ICFJ. So we are here to talk about the power of nano influencers. And we can start the slides. And basically what we're going to talk about is finding and engaging nano influencers and creators. And this is not easy. It requires radical collaboration. And radical collaboration is something that Justin and I know very, very well, because we, starting in February last year, we began the process of creating a new entity, ICFJ Plus. We're co-partners and co-CEOs of. We have a partner in India who unfortunately couldn't be here today. And our goal is to cultivate what we call civic intelligence. And this really is about making sense of the world. You heard Justin talking about that at the opening session. And to do that, to create this healthier information ecosystem, we also need to be collaborating with technologists and researchers and communities and a whole range, breaking journalism out of its silo. And that also means collaborating with creators and influencers. And that idea of doing that, I had a really aha moment in April this year at Perugia, when we gave an award, our first ICFJ News Creator Awards. And this was a really aha moment about how we think of pulling creators into our world. So we gave it to 8 different creators, news creators around the world, who were really sort of practicing good journalism. And afterwards, I was talking with 3 of them, one from Ecuador, one from Canada, one a Hong Kong exile, and they were all so excited to have been validated by a journalism support organization, for their journalistic values. And then for some reason, I asked them, when you interview people, how do you identify yourself? Do you say, I'm a journalist, when you're talking to officials or people on the street or anywhere in between? And all 3 of them literally at the same time just shook their heads vehemently no. They would never do that because nobody would talk to them then. Just pause for a moment what it says about the brand of journalists. But aside from that too, what it also made me realize is that as much as we're sort of trying to pull creators into the journalistic space, we need to be going the other way and pulling and going into their space, working with them in those kind of radical collaborations. They understand audiences and the way audiences are going infinitely better than journalists do. And let me turn it over to Justin to talk a little bit about how those audiences are working.
So at roughly the same time, we were working with the FT Strategies out of London, who were trying to understand what audiences really want from media and from journalists, or even beyond that, journalism-adjacent content. And it was a year-long, really intensive study where we followed people around to watch how they used content, and then we did a lot of interviews and tried to kind of break apart the things that we were seeing in the field. We looked at audiences and users in North America, in Africa, in South Asia. So it wasn't kind of just one geography. It was trying to find out these common usage patterns and audience behaviors across multiple geographies. And once we started breaking it down, or the very clever team that kind of led the research started breaking it down, the fundamental understanding was that the technology, as I tried to say 2 days ago, the technology has enabled a change in the way that people actually find and consume information, not just journalism or content. And that it's been an empowering change. It's not that they're just not avoiding, or that they're avoiding brands or avoiding certain kinds of platforms. It means that they've been able to ask questions about why they want information, and when they do want it, what kind of information they're seeking out. So as you can see on the screen, they're looking for things that is from someone that they trust, and trust not as in that they believe in the brand or they believe that you're going to be honest with them, but trust meaning that you understand the reality that they are living in. So in other words, when you are conveying information to them, it's information that's based on the operating kind of factors that are shaping their world. Secondly, they want it to be hyper-personal. They don't really care about things that are theoretic or kind of high level. They want it to have an impact and a meaning in their immediate space, whether it's a kind of a personal social circle, if it's the street or the community that they live in, so hyper-local as well, or if it relates to the issues and the topics that they care about very deeply. And then finally, they're incredibly demanding about the format. If we're trying to shove content at them in a way that is difficult or inaccessible, they simply move on because they have choice. There is no longer a scarcity of platforms, of sources, or even of types of information. They can find the information they need, even if it's eventually from your source, that's been repackaged by others. And we've heard a lot about people speaking about AI and, kind of non-media people stealing and reusing our information. They see this as a service and a benefit, not as something evil. Effectively, if we're failing to give it to them in a format that they want, they'll find a way to find it in a format that works for them. But more importantly than that, I think is something that many of our organizations are grappling with, as you heard on the panel that Mira mentioned yesterday with 404 and others, figuring out new reporting and storytelling formats. More importantly, the way that people validate information has changed dramatically. And so following people around who are multiple screen, mobile kind of driven information consumers, we found that the modes of consumption have changed dramatically. They sift information because there's so much of it coming, this tsunami or fire hose of information, that you're constantly sifting or filtering information. That's your primary function. And how do you do that? To understand whether it's something you trust or that you are going to be able to share without being embarrassed. You substantiate it, not by knowing that the brand is trustworthy, because often the brands don't align with your own ethical values or political values. It's rather about what are other people in your circle saying about this piece of information or brand. So it's what do I know is true, I know through others. Firstly. Secondly, the moment they find something that they do care about, they tend to go deep on that topic to try and understand the motivations behind it. So you get a lot of surface consuming. The moment something strikes an interest, they go deep. And then they socialize it. Once they've found something, going almost back to that first thing of substantiating, they then share and say, hey guys, I found this. I think we should trust this kind of source or this kind of filtering or kind of framing of an issue. And then finally, they try and put that information into action through sense making. So how do I know what it means? And then what can I do with it? It's very action orientated. And so that second piece there of the substantiation pieces is where we found media are focusing very much on the filtering piece. But many people in the journalism world completely either are blind, it's a blind spot, or they are not designing for these socialized engagement modes around the content that we are producing. And this is where creators are acing it and are eating our breakfast because they understand these active engagement modes that people have around our content.
Exactly that, what Justin just said. That misalignment, journalists focus on sifting. We have left an enormous vacuum that others have filled. And that comes in many flavors, and I just want to take you, we've talked about this a bit on the panels yesterday. Go to the next slide. So there are three types. I was on the, this is an FT strategies study. I was on the advisory group talking through this, and we had some really interesting conversations as FT strategies work toward defining the types of news creators. And I think someone alluded to this yesterday on a panel. And there's basically three: investigator, which is more sort of more traditional, fact-based reporting, research and reporting. We kind of can get our head around that. We have the explainers, taking these complicated issues, making sense of the world. An example for anyone from the US is something called Howtown, which I love, which is two creators basically explaining the world of health and science. And then there is the part that pisses off a lot of journalists, which is the commentator piece. Everybody has an opinion, everybody has 12 opinions, and they're getting very devoted audiences. But there are also two other areas that I want to talk about that we've been thinking a lot about that are not part, actually, of this slide. So take that source away. We missourced. So it's aficionados and news, I can't even say newsfluencers, but it is a thing. And this is less of a news creator. This is the nano influencer that we talked about in the headline. Aficionados are the folks in your communities. And we heard a lot about local. Nick Dawes yesterday was talking about how they're sort of looking for those community people. And it can be on whatever topic. These are people who have deep knowledge and care a lot about an issue, the local housing in their neighborhood, climate change, pick your topic. And they might not have the biggest audience. Maybe it's 100,000 or less. But they have deep trust, they care about it, and they have the ability to be a partner with news outlets. And the last is the word I can't pronounce, so I'm not going to say it again. And these are basically people who are what we call journalist adjacent. These are the comedians and the gamers, your fashionistas, your food bloggers. They are, in their own way, giving news to their audiences. How do we connect there? How do we create radical collaboration with them? Not easy. And the biggest problem is that
they're really important. So as I mentioned 2 days ago, I've got a 13-year-old kid, spends almost half of her life immersed in gaming, online gaming. Her friends all over the world. And she follows people who kind of creates YouTubes about the games that she plays, about the issues, but they'll discuss things like the Ukrainian war. I live in Georgia, which is Ukraine's right next door. We're African, so kind of Sudan gets discussed and various other really complex issues, and they're discussed in these gaming videos because people have opinions. And they become the word that you can't say, newsfluencers. They have a power, a shaping power on the issues and the topics that we make core to our lives and our business as media. And so we need to figure out how to tap in to those audiences because they have levels of trust and engagement that we can only aspire to. They play often a very constructive role. It's very small sometimes, audiences, but incredibly engaged. And the idea is how we can learn from these people who are journalism adjacent, but they see themselves as information creators who play a societal positive role. So pulling this all together, I'll turn over to Sharon to speak about how she's seen this actually work in the field in Nigeria.
Yeah, and this was a project from a few years ago that we helped support. This was in Nigeria, and it was during COVID, around health misinformation. And a group of folks pulled together. It was journalists, it was fact-checking organizations, investigative journalists, and it was also influencers. And they took from across the spectrum a lawyer, a human rights activist, a doctor, a nurse, an actress, a musician, and pulled them all together. And the format, back to what you were saying about formats being important, it wasn't just, oh, go push out our content. They co-created formats together. And they used a lot of humor, video. They used the pidgin, a language which not a lot of media is produced in. And it was a very effective model for how to do this sort of thing, where you're not trying to be something you're not, and it wasn't like, oh, we're going to now produce a TikTok and we're going to shove it down some influencer's throat. It really was a co-creation process, and it was tapping into audiences and ways of communicating that journalists are just not, frankly, all that good at.
So none of that's rocket science. I mean, I think we're all trying pieces of that. The distinguishing thing here that we saw in that Nigerian experiment and others that we've studied is that the ingredient that's often missing from a traditional media approach is conversation. And so what these creators do that often traditional brand media don't is they have authentic, real conversations. It's not a social media manager who's simply trying to answer every comment in a thread or bounce back at people. They are contested, kind of heated conversations. There's a mea culpa when they get it wrong, the creator, and they'll say, yeah, you're right, I've changed my opinion. And so there's an ability there's an opportunity for the audience to see how they can change and shape their creator and the views and the content that's coming out. And that creates a sense of ownership that we often don't see in traditional media production. But finding these people before they become metastars, or megastars at least, is really difficult. The trick is finding when they're small enough and they're keen enough to engage, because they can find value in what you can bring to the relationship, in the same way that you're going to benefit from their platforms and their audiences. And so this is, I think, where we've done something slightly different. I come from an investigative background. It used to be organized crime and corruption and all that stuff. The last 10 years or so, I focused very much on information warfare and disinformation and media integrity. And so because I was so deeply immersed in that space, I realized that we could use the methodology, the investigative OSINT, so open source intelligence methodologies, that we use to track down the bad guys. So the Wagner mercenaries who are conducting kind of psychological and kind of socio-political warfare in West Africa to subvert states. The same early warning systems that we use to detect their false agents, we then started using to understand which positive creators are having a formative shaping impact on the information spaces that we care about. So we can see when disinformation is flowing through an information space. We can also see those people who are drawing a line and who are fighting rumor mongering and war mongering and kind of the other toxic content that you see, but trying to have fact-led discussions with their audiences. So we deliberately used this image. Sharon and I thought about it. She hates the term kill chain. This is a graphic of the European Union's formal methodology that they use when they try and measure the health of an information system, something called the disarm framework. They're not alone. The top one over here is what Meta uses. Up until recently, I don't know how actively they're using it in the last few months, but this is what they've used over the past 10 years to understand information flow through their own environment. And the reality is that information is a pipeline or a funnel, as again you heard on a panel yesterday. And so understanding how that evolves through an information platform or space means that there are opportunities to intersect with it, either to disrupt it, which is what we were doing when I was an investigative information analyst, or to amplify it and empower it, put power and put support behind the positive messages that are happening. The one below is cross-cutting. This is what we use both in the kind of for good sector as well as in government. And this understands when something starts going viral across multiple platforms. It's called the breakout scale. The point why I'm showing you these overly kind of complex infographics is there is existing methodology that parts of our newsrooms are already using that we could repurpose to try and understand our audiences better, but also our allies out there who are journalism adjacent, that we should be forging closer connections with.
And another thing we're doing to sort of help that discovery process is we've teamed up with an organization called Project C in the US. And what they have done, they just released these sort of 50 top creator models in the US. And this is important because we need models. We need to understand what we're talking about. We showed those 5 types before. What are examples of those? And so now we've teamed up. We're going to be doing this globally. We've started. We're doing Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, to Asian regions, looking for model creators to watch. So we start to identify who is out there, the types of folks are out there, and we want to expand that over time, but to really start by understanding how they're operating, what their adjacency is to journalism, and how we can become a more unified information ecosystem. And one last thing, just put up the QR code. So if anybody has ideas, please snap a picture, open the QR code. If there are folks you think we should be looking at, if it's your organization, your creators, somebody you know, somebody you follow on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, please, we're looking for, and from any part of the world, we're looking for as much information as possible.
But it's not easy doing this, using this kind of methodology to find these folks. So the idea behind this list is that, or these lists at least, these watch lists, is that we can help find creators who want to engage with more traditional media and find synergies. That doesn't mean they're going to be your amplifier or your social media marketer. They want to find ways of leveraging off the expertise that you have that they don't have, and they're hoping to share some of the benefits and some of the insights that they do. But finding them is difficult. So the idea is that we want to build these lists that we keep updated, almost as a talent pool or marketplace that we can dip into. There's a degree of vetting that happens and of trust to make sure that we're not potentially making disastrous mistakes where we're exposing ourselves to corrosive audiences or factors. Behind that, and it's something that you heard mentioned right at the conclusion of the previous panel, we're also building a shared services machinery, because many of these new journalism creators, who are often journalists who've left mainstream media, but also these journalism adjacent creators, simply don't have the production or the business machinery behind them to really scale or to thrive. They can get by, and some of them do very well, but most of them actually just scrape through. And so the idea, there was a question earlier on about how do we build those back office machinery? And very luckily, through ICFJ's long relationship with the Knight Foundation in the US, we've got 3 years of runway that we are able to build these solid services that aren't media. We all focus on building the journalism out. It's building the technical stack, as you heard Mira talking about for investigative journalists. Beyond that, it's building out automation and AI services. It's building out market intelligence. I think Bilal was mentioning how to understand your market opportunity and then your audience and figure out what they really need and how you can turn your product to serve that. So we're doing all of that at a centralized level for the creators. In addition to that, there are additional cohorts for exiled media, for investigative media, for climate media and others. So if there are a group of newsrooms that you think would benefit from having shared services, come and speak to us about that as well. We'd be very keen to see if some of the things we've built, which is all open source, could potentially be handed over, or whether we could co-build something to make it work in the geographies or the places where you guys live.
Oh, sorry, go back for a second. And just to add to that, because it goes back to the reason for why we decided to merge, basically. So ICFJ, we are a large network of journalists, 40 years old, been around, around the world. We've got that expertise and basis. Justin has done an amazing job building a large civic tech organization over the last 12 years, all across Africa. So when he says we're building, this is built in many ways. They've been doing it across Africa in very difficult environments. So now what we're trying to do basically is take our network, and scale it. And the Indian partner who I mentioned too is operating in India and Doha. By the way, this is his graphic, so you can love or hate him. He has many more of those to share. They're a little scary, but really has that systems thinking approach and product design approach. So we've taken the three, we keep talking about collaboration and breaking silos. As I said, we're trying to do this ourselves, and it's not easy, but we're doing it. And we think, but that gives us the ability to scale something like this, which I think we all really need. So anyway, we're just, as I said, we're a walking advertisement for collaboration.
It's not hype. So when we did our partnership, we managed to strip, $300,000, $400,000 out of ICFJ's annual operating budget just by taking some of their tech costs out. These subscriptions that you pay that add up. And suddenly you're paying money to someone getting really rich in Silicon Valley rather than paying humans on the front lines doing journalism. So the idea is strip out those costs as much as possible and kind of reinvest that money into the people who are kind of at the core of what we're doing here. So we've got 1 minute to go. We're available on social. If you do want to reach out to us, I'm really notoriously bad on email, so apologies up front.
Don't email him. Do not email him.
She's really good on email.
Email me.
But you come and speak to us. We're really flexible. It's at that formative stage where we're looking for co-implementation partners. There are resources. There's an ability to do matching as well. If you've got some resources, we can potentially match that. But more importantly, this is not vaporware. We've actually built the technologies and the other services that are able to be switched on immediately. So we've got time for maybe 1 or 2 very fast questions. I don't know if there are any, and please don't be scared to challenge or push back. So one over there.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation and the recognition of people who are not doing traditional journalism is great. But there is a reason why influencers are being listened to, and it's because they're outside that ecosystem. And therefore, what is the danger of bringing them into that? My experience, for example, in a place like Germany, where all the mainstream media has one direction, and the only people challenging the state narrative around Gaza and about the protests over there are the independent influencers. And if you bring them into that ecosystem, you risk the danger that they become dependent, and therefore they become not listened to as well, but also like kind of like clearing out the space for, you know, for a unified messaging that is frankly not in the interest of people. So how do you deal with the challenge of co-opting the voices that are already doing great by making them dependent on infrastructure and you know, things that are outside like what they usually do?
Yeah, I mean, the reason for that is that there's this power dynamic where the media tend to be way better resourced than many of these kind of small operations. They're often not just a single, they'll be brand driven, but there'll be 3 or 4 people behind them. We are very anti-co-option. The reason why there's this authenticity and trust with an audience is because they listen and articulate what is heard on the street, which media don't. There's a role for media, and so we think that there's a synergy between these two. And the Nigerian example that Sharon gave was a really good one of how mainstream media was often challenged by these kind of creators, and then there was a very constructive conversation that happened. We're not looking at supporting their being subsumed into the media brand. It's more about an exchange and a conversation to be had between those audiences and this very one-way kind of broadcast approach that media has, where they shove content at an audience. And because I've mentioned Nigeria 3 times in a row, suddenly kind of all his hands gone up. I haven't completely, I mean, that's not a great answer to your question. The reality is that it's the relationship that is forged between the two. The creators that we've seen understand that dynamic and are not prepared to give away the power of kind of owning their own audiences. They're often lured or kind of tempted by the resources, but frankly, they often have larger audiences, and their profit margins on how they monetize those audiences are often way kind of higher than the media themselves. And so we find that once they sit down and really start talking, it doesn't become an issue.
And just, sorry, before you do it, just 2 things quickly to add to that. One is, that's why before I was talking about, it's not bringing them into our world. I think that it's a small thing, but it's a change of mindset. It's a synergy, and so if you think of it as co-opting, we will act like it is co-opting. But if it is considered more where each there is a synergistic relationship, it's different, I think. And the other thing is that when you know, that slide we had before about, you know, finding the right creators at the right time. I think that's important too, because to your point, not everybody. This is not every single influencer, you know, on TikTok, but there are the folks that we are able to build synergistic relationships with, and that's our hope with these sort of like, you know, creators to watch that will help people to start thinking, identifying, and thinking about it in different ways.
Very quick, because we have overrun. So actually, if we could maybe have a chat afterwards. Good. Sorry, want to respect the time.